Okay, so we're going to start with the short passages emphasizing grammar, and then we're going to read a long passage for wording comprehension, and then we'll do a vocabulary list. Okay, passage 2, Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin and star composition. In 1923, when Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin arrived in the United States to study astronomy, however, a widely held belief in her chosen field was that the stars, including the sun, varied widely in its composition. So our first question here is what we do with the underlined section here. We can leave it as it is, but it makes no sense because however it doesn't belong there, right? It's just a simple statement, okay? Nothing precedes it that it's objecting to. So, however, is illogical. Furthermore is illogical, right? Because this is a dependent clause and they haven't even told you what the sentence is about yet. So furthermore doesn't make any sense. Neither does instead. So none of them make sense. So the only right answer is to delete it. And if we delete it, what we get is a very simple sentence. In 1923, when Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin arrived in the United States to study astronomy, a widely held belief in her chosen field was that the stars, including the sun, varied widely in its composition. Now we're on to 17. Okay, the stars varied widely. So this is plural, right? And this is singular. So it doesn't make any sense. So it should be replaced here by which one? Anyone want to guess?
A.
Oh, A would be no change. See, it's is singular, but the stars are plural, right? So we need to change this. But which one would you change it to? Okay, B is the right answer. There. So a widely held belief in her chosen field was that the stars, including the sun, varied widely in their composition. Stars there. They have to agree because it's the stars that have a composition. Okay. So the right answer to 17 is B. 18. Her PhD thesis, published in 1925, asserting that unlike the planets, all stars are largely composed of hydrogen and helium. Pretty groundbreaking stuff, right? Before that, nobody knew what the stars were made of. So is this tense correct? It's an ing form?
No.
No, it's not. So what would you put in its place? Which one of these?
G.
G is right. Her PhD thesis, published in 1925, asserted that it was simple past tense, asserted, simple past tense, because it happened at a given time in the past. Unlike the planets, all stars are largely composed of hydrogen and helium. The idea instantly met with vehement, remember vehement, you don't say the H, we did that last week, vehement opposition from her colleagues. So whenever there's a new idea in science, everybody objects and everybody gets upset until finally the new idea gets tested. And if it's true, it replaces the old idea. Within a few years, however, studies by other astronomers, this is a comma, Otto Struve in particular, went on to prove that Payne-Gaposchkin's assertion was correct. So Otto Struve in particular should be cordoned off by commas, okay? Because it's really a dependent clause. Within a few years, however, studies by other astronomers went on to prove that Payne-Gaposchkin's assertion was correct. So this is a comma here. We need a comma here, okay? So which one of the choices does that?
C.
Yes, good job. So let's read it again. Within a few years, however, studies by other astronomers, comma, Otto Struve in particular, comma, proved that Payne-Gaposchkin's assertion was correct. Okay, the studies proved it. Excellent. Payne-Gaposchkin eventually published more than 150 papers and monographs and rose to be the first woman to chair a department at Harvard University. That's a very clean and correct sentence, and there are no questions there. Struve, in fact, said that her work was the most brilliant thesis ever written in astronomy. Okay, Struve, in fact, okay, and we're looking at this sentence, right? And we're going to ask a question later on about whether or not this sentence is in the right place in the paragraph. But for now, let's just look at 20. Struve, in fact, said, okay, the answer here could either be no change, okay, it could be mentioned, could be declared, or it could be noted. Now, the sentence is for emphasis, right? It's for emphasis. So there has to be something more than just a passive kind of verb. Said is very passive, right? I mean, Struve is making this incredible statement. This is what we call a superlative statement. The most brilliant thesis ever written in astronomy. That's a superlative statement. It's an extreme statement. So said, it's kind of like bland. Mentioned, no, it's bland. Noted, no. What did he do? He declared it. That's in keeping with the feeling of the superlative. Struve, in fact, declared that her work was the most brilliant thesis ever written in astronomy. It's a declaration of a superlative. So the right answer right here is H, declared. Okay, now that her work was, okay, her work was, we got to replace it. We either say her work was or her work considered to be, her work being, or her work to be. Well, this is simple past tense, right? Her work was. To be is the to be form. This is the ing form, just present. Considered to be, no, you don't need that construction, right? Because he's saying it, he's declaring it. So was is correct. So the right answer to 21 is no change. Okay. And 22 is where we talk about sentence order. So here's the deal. The first sentence mentions Struve in particular, right? And then it goes on to say that she became very famous, wrote a lot of papers, became chair at a department at Harvard. Then it goes back to Struve. Wouldn't it make more sense if the first sentence mentions Struve, the second sentence expands on what the mention of Struve, and then the last sentence kind of summarizes her career? Because here it looks like, they talk about other scientists' opinions, then they talk about her career in general, then they talk about Struve again. So to me, the right order for this paragraph, for it to be logical, would be sentence 1, sentence 3, which is again refers back to Struve, and then sentence 2, which summarizes her career. So I believe the right answer to 22 is G, just because you have to maintain a continuity of thought. You're starting out with a discussion where you're talking about what Struve in particular thought about her. And then you can expand on that by saying he declared her to have written the greatest thesis ever written in astronomy. Then you go back and talk about her life in general, her career in general. So it makes a lot more sense that way. So the right answer here is 132. It's G. Okay, let's move on. To accomplish the groundbreaking work of her thesis, comma, published in 1925. Now here's the deal, guys. Published in 1925. Do we need to say it again? No, it's totally redundant. It's repetitious. So when you look at question 23, you're given a choice. And the only right choice is to delete something that you already said, which has now become superfluous. So to accomplish the groundbreaking work of her thesis, Payne-Gaposchkin had applied astrophysicist Meghnad Saha's newly developed theory of ionization to the study of stellar atmospheres, period. She labored, this is a preposition, I'll use it now, but it's incorrect. She labored by what was at the time the world's largest collection of stellar spectra on photographic plates in the world. So this is an expression in English, which you don't find in other languages. We have a verb and then a preposition, right? And which is the correct preposition by usage? She labored upon, she labored over, she labored to, or no change, she labored by. Now, if you were building a house, you could say labored upon, because you're actually constructing the house. But here she's looking at a collection that's already there, right? So the right preposition in this case with the verb is over. You labor over something. She labored over her homework. She labored over her catechism. She labored over the book she was supposed to read. Okay, so it's basically in common English parlance, you labor over something. That's the right preposition. So the right answer to 24 is H. Okay, over. Now 25. She labored over what was at the time the world's, singular world, apostrophe S, possessive, largest collection of stellar spectra on photographic plates in the world. Okay, the world's collection. Largest is an adjective. We can take it out for a second. The world's collection of stellar spectra. So is this possessive singular? Is collection singular? You're darn right it is, right? So basically, it's correct to say the world's, with apostrophe S, largest collection. Okay. Now. Let's look at the choices here. The world's largest stellar spectra collection, the world's largest globally collection, the largest collection of spectra on the photographic plates in the world. So here's the kicker. This is not underlined, so we know it has to stay. So if you're saying it's the largest collection in the world, you don't need to say it's the world's largest collection in the world. You don't need to say, okay, so you can take this out, right, and just put in largest, right? You also mentioned stellar spectra here. You don't need to mention that. And globally is just another way of saying the world. So all of these three, the one that's there and these two, are giving you redundant information because you're already saying it's stellar spectra and you're already saying it's in the world. So all you need in 25 is D, largest. So look at it. The largest collection of stellar spectra on the photographic plates in the world. You've said everything you need to say. You don't need all this redundant stuff, okay? To the untrained eye, stellar spectra look like random smears on a sheet of paper. The images that were created with a spectroscope, an instrument that, when attached to a telescope, captures the various wavelengths of starlight on a color spectrum. Okay. The images that were, this is a tense thing, right? So the question is, what do you want to do? Do you want to say that were? Do you want to say having been? Let's read it. The images that were created. The images having been created. The images were created. The images being created with a spectroscope. Okay. And then explaining what a spectroscope is. Okay. So if the sentence ended here, the images having been created with a spectroscope, that would not be a complete sentence, right? The images were created with a spectroscope. That's a complete sentence. The images being created with a spectroscope, that's not a complete sentence. Since all of the rest of this sentence is a dependent clause, the beginning here has to be a complete sentence. So the only correct answer is were, because that were, having been, and being do not give you a complete sentence. So think of it this way: the images were created with a spectroscope. And now we explain what a spectroscope is: an instrument that, when attached to a telescope, captures the various wavelengths of starlight on a color spectrum. So we're just explaining what a spectroscope is. But again, this sentence has to be a complete sentence, okay? And that's why were, H, is the correct answer. Okay, let's move on. Payne Gaposchkin turned most of her attention to the quote-unquote absorption lines, the dark gaps where light at certain wavelengths was missing. The dark gaps where, the dark gaps showed her that, the dark gaps indicated where, okay? The dark gaps let her know where, okay? So what this is here, this last part of the sentence, is another way of just saying absorption line. Okay? It's basically just explaining absorption line. So you don't need to include her in it. You don't need to mention her. She turned her attention to the absorption lines, comma. Now, what are absorption lines? They are the dark gaps where light at certain wavelengths was missing. Okay? So all you need here is the word where. Okay? Because all you're doing is explaining what an absorption line is. Okay? And none of these other things are required, just where. Because it's a very simple purpose that this phrase has, to tell you what an absorption line is. Nothing else. And you don't need to include her in it. Okay? And lines don't indicate anything. They just are where they are. Okay? They're not people. Okay, good. So the right answer, 27, is no change. Where? All right, let's move on. She concluded ultimately that, now the question is there grammar here? Do we need some type of punctuation? She concluded ultimately that the variations among stellar spectra were not, as previously thought, an indication of different stellar composition. So she concluded, comma. Do you say ultimately that, or ultimately? Where is the break? Where is the pause, right? You have a comma here, you need a comma on the other side. So where do you think that one goes? Anybody? Does it go right after ultimately, or does it go after that?
After ultimately.
That is correct. She concluded ultimately, comma, that the variations among stellar spectra were not, as previously thought, an indication of different stellar composition. Instead, she took the position that the gaps could be attributed to the different temperatures of stars, but that the star's elemental makeup was largely uniform. So instead, she took the position, she had her say in the matter, she put pen to paper saying she went ahead and told everyone. Which one of these fits into this whole passage much better? Remember, this is a very kind of technical narrative about a scientist. Would you use expression had her say in the matter?
No.
No, you wouldn't. It's too colloquial. It's too informal. And it's kind of argumentative. She put pen to paper. Why would you even do that? That's like an anecdote about her writing. Way too much information and not relevant. Went ahead and told everyone. Who'd she tell? These three things are just too informal and colloquial. She took the position that the gaps could be attributed to the different temperatures of stars, but that the star's elemental makeup was largely uniform. This is absolutely correct. So the right answer to 29 is no change. Okay, good. Now we move on to 30. The writer wants to add the following true statement to the preceding paragraph. The gaps represent the chemical elements in a star's atmosphere that absorb the light. Okay. Now, we got to figure out where this sentence would fit in best at point A, B, C, or D. So we're going to go back and find point A. Try to remember what the sentence is. The gaps represent the chemical elements in a star's atmosphere that absorb the light. So let's go back and find A. It's always a hard thing for me to, I can't spot these things. Anyone see A anywhere? There's A. Okay. Newly developed a theory of ionization to the study of stellar atmospheres. Okay. Nowhere have they mentioned anything about gaps yet. So an explanation of what gaps are would be inappropriate here. Right? Okay. Now we move on to B. When attached to a telescope, captures the various wavelengths of starlight on a color spectrum. Again, we haven't mentioned anything about gaps. So sticking an explanation of gaps in here makes no sense because we haven't discussed gaps. C, paying combustion turned most of our attention to the absorption lines, the dark gaps where light at a certain wavelength was missing. Aha. So right here, that sentence, the gaps represent the chemical elements in a star's atmosphere that absorb the light. This would be perfect right there. Okay? Because she mentions gaps, and then they explain the physics of why gaps are there. So it follows one from the other. It's a sequitur. In other words, it makes sense to put it there. So the right answer to 30 is point C. Good. Okay, guys, we're done with the short stuff. Now we're going to be reading a passage, which is actually beautifully written, and actually talks a lot about mythology and geography. And then we're going to be answering 10 questions. This passage is adapted from the book Atlantic by Simon Winchester, 2010. The Minoans and Phoenicians are ancient cultures known for sailing the Mediterranean Sea. The Pillars of Hercules are the rocks on each side of the Strait of Gibraltar, which separates Spain from Morocco. The Phoenicians were the first to build proper ships and to brave the rough waters of the Atlantic. To be sure, the Minoans before them traded with great vigor and defended their Mediterranean trade routes with swift and vicious naval force. Their ships, built with tools of sharp-edged bronze, were elegant and strong. They were made of cypress trees, sawn in half and lapped together, with white painted and sized linen stretched across the planks, and with a sail suspended from a mast of oak, and oars to supplement their speed. So it was a sailboat and a rowboat. But they worked only by day. They didn't go out at night. And they voyaged only between the islands within a few days' sailing of Crete. Never once did any Minoans dare venture beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the crashing waves of the Sea of Perpetual Gloom, which is basically the Atlantic Ocean. The Minoans, like most of their rival thalassocracies, a thalassocracy, thalassos in Greek means sea. So thalassocracy would be a civilization that rules by the sea. The Minoans, like most of their rival thalassocracies, accepted without demur the legends that enfolded the Atlantic, the stories and the sagas that conspired to keep even the boldest away. The waters beyond the pillars, beyond the known world, beyond what the Greeks called the Ecumeni, the inhabited earth, were simply too fantastic and frightful to even think of braving. There might have been some engaging marvels close inshore, the gardens of the Hesperides, and somewhat farther beyond, the greatest of all Greek philosophical wonderlands, Atlantis. But otherwise, the ocean was a place wreathed in terror. I can find no way whatever of getting out of this gray surf, Odysseus might well have complained. No way out of this gray sea. The winds howled too fiercely. The storms blew up without warning. The waves were of a scale and ferocity never seen in the Mediterranean. Nevertheless, the relatively peaceable inland sea of the Western classical world, was to prove a training ground, a nursery school for those sailors who in time, and as an inevitable part of human progress, would prove infinitely more daring and commercially ambitious than the Minoans. Just about the same time that Santorini erupted, and as many believe, gave the final fatal blow to the Minoan ambitions, so the more mercantile of the Levantines awoke. From their sliver of coastal land, a sliver that in time would become Lebanon, Palestine, and Israel, the big Phoenician ships ventured out and sailed westward, trading, battling, dominating. When they came to the Pillars of Hercules, sometime around the 7th century BC, they, unlike all of their predecessors, decided not to stop. Their captains, no doubt bold men and true, decided to sail right through into the onrushing waves and storms and see before all other men just what lay beyond. The men from the port of Tyre appear to have been the first to do so. Their boats, broad-beamed, sickle-shaped, round ships or galoi, so called because of the sinuous fat curves of the hulls, and often with 2 sails suspended from hefty masts, one at midships and one close to the forepeak, were made of locally felled and surprisingly skillfully machined cedar planks, fixed throughout with mortise and tenon joints, and sealed with tar. Most of the long-haul vessels from Tyre, Byblos, and Sidon had oarsmen too, double banks of 13 oarsmen on either side of the larger ships, which gave them a formidable accelerative edge. Their decorations were grand and often deliberately intimidating. Enormous painted eyes on the prow, many-toothed dragons and roaring tigers, tipped with metal ram blades, in contrast to the figureheads of women later beloved by Western sailors. I'll explain that to you in a second. Phoenician ships were built for business. The famous Bronze Age wreck discovered at Uluburun in southern Turkey by a sponge diver in 1982, and which, while not definitely Phoenician, was certainly typical of the period, displayed both the magnificent choice of trade goods available in the Mediterranean and the vast range of journeys to be undertaken. The crew on this particular voyage had evidently taken her to Egypt, to Cyprus, to Crete, to the mainland of Greece, and possibly even as far as Spain. When they sank, presumably when the cargo shifted in a sudden storm, the holds of the 45-foot-long galoi contained a bewildering and fatally heavy amassment of delights, far more than John Masefield, who wrote a poem about ships, cargoes, could ever have fancied. There were ingots of copper and tin, blue glass and ebony, amber, ostrich eggs, an Italian sword, a Bulgarian axe, figs, pomegranates, a gold scarab with the image of Nefertiti, a set of bronze tools, a ton of terebinth resin, hosts of jugs and vases and Greek storage jars, silver and gold earrings, and innumerable lamps. Okay, so there's a couple of things we need to talk about. Okay, let's go over to this paragraph. Where is Tyre, T-I-R-E? You guys know where that is? It's a city. It's a city that used to be the main port of the Phoenician Empire. And now this city is in Lebanon. It's, I don't know, about 80 miles south of Beirut, right on the Mediterranean. So the men of Tyre were the Phoenicians, okay? And then it goes on to say here that we'll talk about mortise and tenon joints. You don't need nails with mortise and tenon joints. The wood is shaped like a 3-dimensional puzzle. So the tenon fits into the mortise, okay? And then they sealed it with tar. So you would not have needed to use nails, okay? And they talk about the oarsmen, right? But the decorations, intimidating, enormous. Dragons, okay? Metal ram blades. You got to understand what a ram blade is. In those days, there was no artillery. There were no muskets. How did ships fight? They rammed each other. That's how they sank each other. So at the front of the ship, the prow of the ship, you would have something very hard and sharp, presumably made out of metal, out of bronze. and they would penetrate the hull of the other ship. So you would speed up as fast as you could, try to catch the side of the other ship, the broadside, and then you'd ram a hole in it and sink it. And that's how naval battles were fought back in 700 BC. So when they're referring to this, the metal, the hard metal, okay, tipped with metal ram blades, that's what they're talking about. In contrast to the figureheads of women later beloved by Western sailors. So many of the whaling ships from New England, many of the British men of war and the British sloops and trading ships would have goddesses at the prow of the boat, you know, and so that was supposed to bring them good luck. Like it might represent the goddess Athena or the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of the waves. But though that was much more of a peaceful image than the kinds of things the Phoenicians painted on their boat. Okay. The other thing I wanted to mention to you is this discussion of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. Ikumene, okay, in Greek means the known world. And it's pronounced Ikumene, even though it doesn't look like it is, okay? The Greeks basically said Ikumene was everything around the Mediterranean. So if you went out past the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic Ocean, you were outside of the known world, okay? Now, the Gardens of the Hesperides. The Gardens of the Hesperides is from mythology, right? The Hesperides were these nymphs, these women, young, beautiful women who were the children of Atlas, right? And they were the nymphs of the setting sun. Now, remember, when you're in the Mediterranean, where does the sun set? It sets over the Atlantic Ocean. So you'd see the setting sun as this golden light coming over the water. And so the idea was that there was an island out there full of these goddess nymphs, who were the nymphs of the sunset. And in their garden, supposedly, they had apple trees that basically grew golden apples. The golden apples, just like the golden sun. So when you hear the island of the Hesperides, you have to think about Greek myth, the Garden of the Hesperides, where golden apples grow under a golden sunset and beautiful nymphs live there. And actually, Hesperos in Greek means evening. So in the evening, the sun sets. Now, if anyone knows anything about the Catholic Church, it's basically Latin, right? The Catholic Church started in the part of the world that was Latin. Well, you sing Vespers. Vespers are always sung at sunset. And Vespers are the Latin version of the Greek word Hesperos, which means evening. So when you sing Vespers, you're basically singing as the sun is setting. So the Garden of the Hesperides, the Vespers that you sing in Catholic Church, all of those things are related etymologically, okay? So it's very important to understand what that is. And believe it or not, Vespers, or Vesper in Latin, turned into Venus, the evening star. Planet Venus has always been referred to as the evening star, and the word Venus, V-E-N-U-S, is a derivation of Vesper, which in Latin meant evening. So all these things are connected. You want to see the relationships between them. Okay. All right. So now we'll answer the questions. Okay, let's start with 11. In the fourth paragraph, lines 33 through 45, the focus of the passage shifts from information about the Minoans to a discussion of the, well, let's take a look at this thing, 33 through 45. The relatively peaceable inland sea of the Western classical world was to prove a training ground. Sailors who would inevitably make progress and be more daring than the Minoans. And then there was the eruption of the Santorini volcano, which ended the Minoan Empire. And they were the more mercantile of the Levantines awoke. In other words, the whales of the sea from their sliver of coastal land, which was Phoenicia, okay, which is currently Lebanon, Palestine, Israel. So then they talk about the big Phoenician ships sailing westward. They were trading, they were battling, and they were dominating. So this was the passing of the torch from the Minoan Empire and the Minoan trade to the age of the Phoenician ships, which actually went far beyond what the Minoans did. So let's see. It shifts from the Minoans to A, reasons that the Phoenicians traded with various other nations. No, it doesn't mention that. Shipbuilding and sailing prowess of the Phoenicians. Yes. Talks about how they made these beautiful ships and how they went out into the Atlantic. First Phoenician ship to sail, it doesn't mention one ship. Specific journeys, it doesn't mention specific journeys. Just talks about the prowess of the shipbuilding and the sailing of the Phoenicians. So 11B is the correct answer. 12, based on the passage, the Minoans and the Phoenicians were similar in that their primary reason for sailing was to explore the unknown regions, trade with other nations, conquer neighboring nations, keep their land safe from attack. They were trading people. That's how they accumulated their wealth. So their primary goal was to keep the trade routes open for trade and to go all over the place, gathering all kinds of exotic goods and bringing them back in exchange for things that they had in plentiful supply in their own countries. Okay, so the right answer here is trade with other nations. Okay, 13, the passage makes clear that Minoan ships and Phoenician ships were similar in that most featured mortise and tenon joints for stability, hulls made from cypress trees, oars for added speed, 2 masts. Okay, the Phoenician ships had 2 masts, Minoans had 1. Oars for added speed, yeah, they both had oars. Hulls made from cypress, that was the Minoans. Remember, the Phoenicians made it from cedar. And mortise and tenon joints for stability, that was for the Phoenicians. Okay? So basically, the only one that's both types of ships had was oarsmen to row, to accelerate their speed. And they used that in battle too. They'd have the men row really fast and they would ram the other boats. Okay. The main idea of the third paragraph, lines 16 through 32, is that the Minoans and other sailors at the time, let's go down here to 16 through 32. Minoans, like most of their rivals, accepted without demur the legends that unfolded the Atlantic. So they were scared to go out into the Atlantic, right? They had dreams about mythical figures out there, but they were pretty much terrified. So let's see what it says here. Created myths about the Atlantic to prevent people from exploring it. No, they didn't create the myths, they believed them. Told terrifying tales of the voyages they took near the Atlantic. No, they never did that. Feared the Atlantic because of its storms and the legends told about it. Aha, that could definitely be it. Lacked the skills and tools necessary for navigating the Atlantic. It never says that. It says that they were afraid. They're afraid to go out into the Atlantic because of the legends they heard. Okay, so H is the correct answer to 14. 15, details in the passage suggest that the author considers the Phoenicians venturing into the Atlantic to be an act that was both ambitious and unnecessary, unwise and ill-fated, brave and foolish, courageous and inevitable. So what do you think the right one is there?
D.
The author now. The author thinks what about the Phoenicians? Does he think that they're unwise or does he think that they're courageous? How does he see the Phoenicians? Well, he sees them as courageous and he sees them going out into the Atlantic as the inevitable result of progress. So remember, he talks about the Phoenicians from their sliver of coastal land. The big Phoenician ships ventured out and sailed westward, trading, battling, and dominating. An inevitable part of human progress. Daring, ambitious, more daring, more ambitious than the Minoans. So he considered them to be courageous, and he considered this movement into the Atlantic to be an inevitable result of the steady progress of humanity. Okay, so the right answer to 15 is D, courageous and inevitable. Which of the following statements about Minoan sailors is most strongly supported by the passage? They frequently battled the Phoenicians, doesn't say that. They traded only with Greece and Egypt, doesn't say that. They sailed only during the daytime, it does say that, right? They painted elaborate designs on the ships, that was the Phoenicians. So the Minoans only sailed during the day. And if you go back, and see, I think it says that they only sold by day. They worked only by day. There it is. Explicitly says they only sailed during the day. So you just have to go back to the text and find that, okay? So H is the right answer to 16. 17, the passage states that according to many people, the fatal blow to Minoan ambitions occurred when the Phoenicians reached the Pillars of Hercules, the Minoans lost control of their trade routes, Minoa was conquered, Santorini erupted. What do you think the right answer is here?
D.
D is right, Santorini erupted. So there was a huge volcanic eruption on the island of Santorini, which is just north of Crete. Crete was the home base of the Minoans. And apparently they had a lot of their ships and a lot of their supplies were on the island of Santorini. And so all of their stuff got destroyed. Many of their people died. And apparently there was a huge cloud of dust, volcanic ash that spread out over Crete. So the eruption of Santorini was a gigantic event. And it seems to have brought an end to the Minoan Empire. Okay, so the right answer there is D. According to the passage, the first Phoenicians to sail through the Pillars of Hercules were most likely from Crete, Byblos, Sidon, Tyre. Well, we went over this now. What's the city that's currently in Lebanon that was part of Phoenicia? Which one of these? Anybody?
J.
Yeah, Tyre, which in Arabic is pronounced Sur. So if you meet Arabs that say Sur, what they're referring to is Tyre. Okay, in the passage, what contrast does the author establish between Phoenician ships and the Western ships that come later? Okay, we talked about this. The Western ships had the beautiful goddesses, right? They weren't warlike. Whereas the Phoenicians had these scary dragons and big eyes painted on their ships that were much more aggressive. So let's see what the choices are. Phoenician ships' decorations were designed to be more intimidating than those of Western ships that came later. Yeah, definitely. Phoenician ship sails were designed to be stronger than those of Western ships. Doesn't say that. Don't add stuff that isn't there. Phoenician ships' hull size was more impressive than that of Western ships. No, absolutely not. Phoenician ships' acceleration was more formidable than that of Western ships. It didn't say that either. So the only thing that it did say was that the decorations were designed to be more intimidating. And they talk about fiery dragons and big eyes looking at you, as opposed to the goddesses, the women for the Western ships that came later. Okay, based on the passage, the statement that the ship discovered at Ulaburan sank when the cargo shifted in a storm can best be described as a fact supported by the damage that the ship's hull sustained in the storm. Well, we can't say it's a fact because we don't know, we weren't there. Fact supported by an entry in ancient shipping records, doesn't say that. So when you see fact, you know it's not a fact because there's no actual evidence. Nobody was actually there. There's no eyewitness account of it or no video. Reasoned judgment, yeah, they're making an educated guess, supported by the evidence of the heavy load the ship was carrying. Well, does it mention anything about a heavy load? We'll go back and see. Reasoned judgment supported by how the cargo was spread out on the seafloor. Does it mention anything about how the cargo was spread out? Well, We'll go back and see. So it has to be either H or J, but there has to be some mention either of the heaviness of the load or how the cargo was spread out on the seafloor. So if we go back to the last paragraph, okay. Okay. Displayed both a magnificent choice of trade goods available and the vast range of journeys to be undertaken. The crew on this particular voyage had evidently taken her to Egypt, to Cyprus, to Crete, to the mainland of Greece, possibly even as far as Spain. When they sank, comma, presumably when the cargo shifted in a sudden storm, comma, the holds of the 45-foot long Galois contained a bewildering and fatally heavy amassment of delights. Right there, the load was too heavy. And it never goes on to describe the arrangement of the stuff on the seafloor. So when you go back here, the only right answer here is evidence of the heavy load of the ship. So H is the right answer. And it's not a fact. It's a reasoned judgment based on what they can discern, which is that the ship was loaded, heavily loaded. Okay, so we're done with that, guys. And now we're going to go on to our vocabulary. And kind of an interesting vocabulary section today. Okay, so let me just get rid of this. There we go. Okay, first word of the day is plank. And it's not the exercise that you do to strengthen your abdomen. Although that is, people do talk about the plank where you're on your elbows and your toes and you hold your body up. That's a plank. But what plank are they referring to here?
The wooden boards.
Yeah, they're heavy, thick boards. They're wider than they are thick. So a plank might be 1 inch thick and 6 inches wide or 8 inches wide. So they are wider than they are thick, and they're long. So that you take those planks and you make the side of a ship with them. Demure, what does it mean to demure?
To go around.
It means to hesitate, to disagree with, kind of to object to, not to accept. So when John was asked to, I don't know, throw the tea into the Boston Harbor, he demurred. In other words, he didn't want to do it. That's kind of it. Somebody asks you to do something and you don't really want to do it, and you don't do it, you demur, meaning, not really, I don't, go without me, go without me. Okay. Sinuous, what does it mean to be sinuous?
Long and winding.
Yeah, like a snake. Like a coiled, like a snake that kind of, when a snake moves, it kind of like has like different half circles forming. It's like sinuous, right? And sinuous is also like strong too, like long, thin muscles. Somebody who like is a track star. You can like trace the line of their muscles. So they're sinuous, okay? And the word sinus, which basically is the curved cavity inside your head, in your face, the sinuses, that comes from the same root. Okay, hull, what is a hull?
The body of a ship.
Yeah, the frame or body of a ship. And sometimes people refer to the hull of a plane, not including the wings and the tail, the hull, the main mass of it. And also for a ship, the same thing, not including the mast or the rudder, just the actual main body of the ship. Mortise, what's mortise? We talked a little bit about this.
It's like the slot that you put something into.
Yeah, it's a slot that you put in, usually in wood. And so if you're bringing two sides of a barn together and you don't have any nails, what you can do is you can drill a hole in one plank, and then at a perpendicular angle, you can narrow down the other plank to fit into that hole. And then you can use like either glue or tar or something. So a lot of cabins were built that way. People didn't have nails, especially on the frontier. They knew how to do that. They knew how to shape the wood so it would fit together like Lincoln logs, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Okay, so the mortise is the hole, and the tenon is the part projecting out of the other piece of wood that fits into the mortise. So whenever you say mortise and tenon, you know what we're talking about, okay? Just like a wall switch. You have the plug and then that goes into the wall switch, right? Plugs into the wall. Okay, prow. What is the prow?
It's the bow of a ship.
Yeah, it's the very front of the ship. It's the pointed front part of something, the prow. Like if you hit your head and you get a big swollen spot in the middle of your forehead, people sometimes say, wow, where'd you get that prow? Right, sticking out like that. Ingot, what's an ingot?
A block of metal.
Yeah, it's a massive metal, but it's melted into a shape, cast into in a cast, right? It's melted into a cast, formed into a shape for storage and transport. So gold ingots, iron ingots, copper ingots, and then they'll take them someplace and they'll melt them down again and then transform them into a different shape for a different purpose. So think of ingots as just like a lump of metal that's in a shape that's easy to transport and store. Ebony. Now, ebony here doesn't refer to the color. It refers to a product that they traded. Obviously, ebony means black, but what is the product that they traded? What is it? What is the ebony referring to?
Timber.
Yeah, heavy black wood. Usually it grows in the tropics. Very beautiful wood. And it's very prized wood, very expensive. So ebony is very expensive wood. And the last word on our list is pomegranate. Has anyone ever eaten a pomegranate? You guys know what they are? Has anyone eaten a pomegranate?
Like Greek mythology.
A pomegranate is a real fruit, right? Anyway,
Yes, sir.
it's like a red fruit with a thick skin on it. And inside, it's got all these seeds that are kind of like big red seeds. They taste almost like citrus almost. They're very good. And you basically scoop them out and you can eat the seeds from the pomegranate. But there's got thousands of these little seeds inside of the pomegranate. Okay, so it's a reddish berry, size of an orange, with a thick skin and many seeds inside, little red seeds. Okay, now we're going on to our etymology. The first word we're going to look at is fairly simple, but it's connected to many other words, and that is the word prow. Prow. So the word prow comes from the Greek proira, which basically means the bow of the ship, the front of the ship. But it's related to the Indo-European word pro, P-R-O. What comes first? What goes forward? We proceed. We proceed. We produce. We proclaim. We promise. Okay? So that word prow is related to every word in English that begins with the prefix pro. And it means forward or first. Okay? And that's important to understand that relationship. Okay, the second word is pomegranate. Now, pomegranate comes from two words that are put together. Okay? Who knows what the Latin word for apple is? It's pomum. Pomum, P-O-M-U-M. So, and in French, a potato is a pomme de terre, an apple of the earth. So if you hear pomme de terre, frites, it's fried French fries. Okay? Pomme de terre is apple of the earth. So in Latin, pomum is apple. So this is apple. And then there's another Latin word, okay, granata, which means what? Anybody? Granata in Latin means many seeds or many grains. So here's an apple with many seeds inside. Okay, a pomegranate. And palm, as you know, begins pomade. What's pomade? What is pomade? You see it in the CVS or in the Rite Aid in the hair section. Does anyone know what pomade is? Guys put it on their hair to keep the hair from getting messed up. It's like a gel. It's like an ointment that you rub into your hair and then you comb your hair. It's like what we used to call greasy kid stuff. Okay, pomade. And the reason they call pomade is because it's been around for thousands of years. And originally, men would mash up apples. And they would take the mashed up apples and rub it into their hair. And that was the original pomade. But the word palm, apple, stayed with it. So if you go to the hair section of your store, of your drugstore, look for pomade, P-O-M-A-D-E, and you'll know where the palm came from. It came from the fact that it used to be mashed up apples. Okay. The other thing I want you to see, granata or granate. Can anyone think of another English word that is similar to this, to the Latin, that means seed or little thing, little object? Anybody? How about a grain of sand?
No.
A grain of sand comes from the same Latin root, granatus, which basically means many little seeds. So a grain of sand or a granule, right? A granule is a tiny little particle. Again, it comes from the same Latin root. And actually the food itself, grain, the idea of grain like a wheat field or a barley field, it's because the little berries that come off are these tiny little berries that look like little granules. So that's why we call barley and wheat and rye, we call it grain. Again, from the Latin root, granatus, many seeds. Okay, guys? And then that's pretty much it for today. Any questions? All right, guys, have a great week. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.